All right, good morning. Day 15, I believe. Pretty sure it's going on and growing, so I lose track if I don't check my notes beforehand. But pretty sure we're at day 15, education. Um, I want to get right into it, so I do, but I don't want to be remiss in letting you know about where this information is coming from, how I've been motivated. I stumbled was introduced to this man, Dr. Claude Anderson, author of a Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. And I've just kind of been on my personal mission about letting friends and family know about this information. It's nothing we talked about in our circles. Um, so I feel like it's kind of a duty to kind of put some of this information out there. I'm on a 365-day challenge to do that, and I believe this is day 15 of it, so it hasn't quite become habit yet, but I am showing good signs of determination. Another book by Dr. Claude Anderson, Black Labor, White Wealth, and white wealth, we're going to find out, does rest on the backs of black labor in this country, and his national plan to empower black Americans, PowerNomics. Please get those books. We're also, it won't be all racism and seriousness all the time, white power, black vulnerability, but we'll also look at American literature. This is Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Please get a copy of that. And there's even, I think Google has, free. Google has a lot of books, and I think Uncle Tom's Cabin is one of them. Read that because we're going to talk occasionally about how literature, we'll talk especially about how that book shapes racial thinking and economics in America. The purpose of this series, year-long videos, is to talk about just that, how blacks figure into America, where we really are presently, and teasing out, engaging in some critical thinking about the relationship between whites and blacks in America, where we all reside and live in this nation of incredible wealth, the history of where we are today as blacks, as whites, whatever. I just introduced one of my white friends to this series of videos. I'm struggling with coming out on these issues. That's another topic. I don't want to forget also hashtag us too, hashtag USTOO. Go there, Google it, type it in your browser and search whatever you're using. Find that community and to hear more about these issues. I'm not an expert. I'm just regurgitating the best I can these topics as Dr. Claude Anderson brings them out. Also, check out a guy named Dr. Boyce Watkins, and he's running a business school. I believe he's very sincere in his desire to elevate blacks. Not easy, not an easy task. There's a lot of things. There's economics, there's stigmas, relationships, unity. We got a lot of things to overcome. Yet he's plugged into a community, and a lot of blacks doing very well. And I'm broaching that community. My name is Tomlins Nyback. It's a play on words. You who know me know my real name. I feel like my real name is not important anyway. But Tomlins Nyback is something I want you to toy around with and see if that brings about any meaning for you. I'm going to start out with a little story. We're going to talk about education today, and I think this figures into our discussion. When I was down, I spent months. This was during probably the early beginnings of my drug and alcohol history, which is extensive, that covers decades and still impacts today. I am clean and sober, have been for a little while now. But I was down in the southeastern part of the United States, and as you can imagine, this is the crucible of slavery in this country. This was contested territory for the Civil War. This is where blacks would go in their lifetime. Blacks would generally be sold south. They go further south. They were like machines that were eventually just used up and worked to death down maybe in Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama. Those states are where you find some of your hardest labor. It's, giant cotton plantations and fields, giant tobacco industries, but further north, slave life, if you can call it, easier, was more civilized, if there's a civilized slave life. And so I'm down there, and as you can imagine, I'm not expecting, and this is the late 90s maybe, so I'm not, the South already has a stigma about blacks. So I'm down there kind of getting my head together and cleaning up my life and all that, and I had a lot of outreach. I had a lot of help from white people in my lifetime. I know that. So try to remember, this is not, we're not necessarily getting back at whitey and hating whites. We are understanding the past so we can, as blacks, come together and elevate. Dr. Anderson makes a very clear point about the past, and that we need to understand the past. Without knowing the past, we wouldn't be able to get out of the room because we wouldn't know how we got there, right? So we need the past so we can move about, so I can get back to my job to support myself. The past is important. And it's even better if it's used as a tool to move further away from making any mistakes that happened in the past. So I'm down there in this in the southeastern part of the United States, North Carolina specifically, and I started to do well. I had a lot of great stretches in my career with recovery and things, those issues like that. And so, I'm surrounded by these white people. It wasn't thick or overt, but there was a sense of the old racial expectations there from slavery days. I remember I bought an expensive piece of guitar equipment. And I went to this music shop, and I think this guy, I think he thought I was joking about wanting this piece of equipment. I think he gave me some lip service. I believed he ordered it and all that. I came back 2 weeks later, no equipment, and I was like, I had to step to him and say, dude, I want this equipment. Please order it. And then he realized I was serious. But the problem could have been, black man. How could a black man want this expensive equipment or his guitar and stuff? So some of that. But the story I want to relate is that as I was getting it together, a white family had given me a car, and that would allow me to move around better. I fell in with favor with this family, great family, white family. And when I got this car, it gave me some mobility, it gave me some prestige and some notice there in the community. I could get back and forth to my job at that time, and I could, you know, a car is an important machine to have in America. It's a sign of further freedom and privileges. And at the place I was working at, I was there long enough to get some experience, which we were repairing pallets, so you don't need a whole lot of education to repair a pallet. But I'm there long enough where they would place new guys with me and show them how to repair a pallet. So anyway, another white man had come into this space, this recovery space I was living at, and so, you know, I was sharing. I was giving him the car. I was not giving him the car. I was giving him rides to work and back, educating him about, um, you know, repairing pallets. And I was in charge. We had a table, and there was a guy on each side, and we're repairing pallets. And it's good teamwork when it runs right. So he doesn't. Before I got the car, and when I was in need, and the boss's son was taking us back and forth, my relationship with this man was great. But when I got the car, our relationship changed. Now, unbeknownst to me, I had no idea how strong this white entitlement, this feeling that whites, I mean, you got to think there's laws. We'll get into this. Hopefully, I'll find it in Dr. Anderson's readings. There are laws about um, black men, blacks, not making better wages than whites, no matter what the education. A college graduated black still had wages less than a high school graduated white. The discrepancy in earnings is incredible. I didn't know all these things. So our relationship changed. He didn't want to ride with me. He wanted to be chauffeured. He had his opportunity to be chauffeured in a car by a black man. He didn't want that, and I believe that was his racism showing up. Wasn't the smartest guy. I'm not talking bad about him. But we got to be honest. Not every white person is better than a black person, and vice versa. We got to come with our own individual merits. But when it comes to stereotyping, there's a problem. So he didn't want to ride, and now the boss had to make an extra trip to our place, even though I was going that way. And you can imagine how that looks logistically. Which there is no logic in racism except greed, evil, sadistic intentions. So he had his little problem with that. This is an important piece of education because in my circles, where I come from, blacks didn't talk about where they were in this white, powerful, dominated society. We didn't talk enough about our history, disappointments, fears, our paranoia, trepidation about interacting with this system, the pitfalls. Children need to understand these things from an early age. Economics, especially. Why my dollar is not as powerful as the white dollar. Things like that. Another example, and you'll find me hinting at how the education and any aspect of life in America is impacted by this slave economy going as far back as the 1600s in this country, a carryover from serfdom in Europe. You know, it, those things, any kind of previous slavery was humane and not permanent. But for the white Americans came over and they made slavery permanent, and there was no compensation except for the black slave to receive just enough to live to the next day to serve the master. That was it. There was no education, no aspirations that directly benefited blacks as a community. You know, so this the spirit or mind paradigm thinking that carries over and over in generation, I believe visited my family. There wasn't a lot of formal education in my family. It was more like I had to sit back and watch, and it was like some things I was expected to get by osmosis in some way. I'll use my dad's fishing example. My dad, he liked to fish, and fishing is cool. I know how to fish, but I didn't learn it necessarily from my father. Dad would get me out, and I'd have my little small boy fishing pole and stuff, and he'd have his big pole, and we'd go out somewhere. It was boring as all heck because he would give me the fishing pole, he would cast the bait for me, and then walk off. So I'm wondering what to do. There's no instruction in black education. Um, it's only after a mistake is made that some type of intervention, usually abusive, comes in. So invariably, I would, this happened a lot. I would do my best. I wouldn't touch the damn pole. But somehow the reel would get tangled and entwined and very all messed up. And so I'd show it to my dad. He'd get it untangled, no instruction, cast the bait, no instruction, hand me the pole, no instruction, and walk away and go do his fishing. Amazing. But I'm trying to illustrate how it may have been for the slave back in those times. I mean, think about not being able to even move or speak unless master said so, not being able to urinate. Men in prison have specific, very specific, times to shower and use the bathroom. Some of their time is micromanaged, and they don't. Sometimes in the movie Shawshank Redemption, character Red says, he can't even urinate unless someone gives him permission or tells him it's time to do it. So that's what I fear prevails in the black community to some level as far as education goes. We're waiting to be spoon-fed. Our education is so controlled and monitored and does not occur outside of white control. And that's a huge problem. It keeps us passive till not until later in life, decades later, when I'm stumbling onto Dr. Anderson's works and his energy, that I'm like, yeah, you know, something's deficient and missing in my life. So blacks need to get better at communicating with one another properly at a communal level. Like I say, these are conversations I've never had in my circles. When Roots came out, you know, Alex Haley's Roots, that was more like a game to recite our lineage as far back as we could go. But that was the most excitement I saw about black education that that I can remember. A black education, you know, formally in schools is uh, in schools, even kind of for whites, more so for blacks. Blacks are more, it's a blue collar employment preparation more so than a tool for economic achievement, growth, and empowerment. You know, I was bused, to school, went 4 years to a school that was towns away, and, you know, taking that bus ride every day, you know, I don't know, you know, and it was a white community, white school, and all that. There was no commentary on why I was bused out to that school. It was just a decision was made on my life, and as a just as a slave would, I passively accepted it and went there, did well, uh, graduated that school with great marks and things like that. But to this day, I don't, I don't use a lot of the education I received. That's 4 years of a person's life, and education did not. That education did not prepare me for my position, for where I was at in the world. It was interesting. It was a vocational school, and I had a Jewish instructor. And every once in a while, he'd pull me into his office, and he would talk to me, but it was in terms I didn't understand. He wasn't explicit. I felt in those mid-teenage years that he was trying to communicate something about race. He would talk about him being Jewish and how that was a source to receive resistance from the world, and he would try to communicate that to me, being black. Um, I really wish he had been explicit in what he was communicating, but I mean, looking back, like public school communities, you can't necessarily be too explicit about racial matters. You know, that he would have been, had I told anyone he was having these discussions that I didn't understand anyway. He was liable to be marked as a dangerous person because those issues of enlightenment are threatening to white power. It's you're shining light on the truth of white power in America, and that's very dangerous. That threatens whites. They don't like that. Um, the ones that are actively engaged in the oppression don't like being exposed, and then there's probably a great many whites who are not explicitly engaged in keeping blacks apart and oppressed, yet they do receive privileges ancestral privileges in their position. They'll always be able to ethno-aggregate and have vertical integration. They'll be able to move successfully in um, wealthy white circles. You know, remember blacks, we're struggling with a flat line. You know, and only occasional successes go up and down the ladder of success and wealth acquisition in America. Right, so there's no there just seems to be no end. Any part of life that I can um, talk about has been touched by some negativity in America, and the negativity is the slavery. That whole period, we've not gotten too far away from that. Don't ever think we are. It's not until blacks can move as a community, like the Asians, like the Hispanics, and of course the whites, so we can get some political power and hold people accountable and begin making our statements. But that's a little ways off. That's going to take some, we've got to massage that a little bit. So there's there's passivity in our education. We're not doing enough to help our young women. Our education, the public education, is to support white power, to prepare those black children to be successful in the workplace, where you're not going to be given the opportunity there to become a millionaire or to excel and grow. You're only being prepared to serve blue-collar white systems. Also, I want to think about education and how it makes blacks feel. I said before how us blacks, early education, were hammered with the realization that our ancestors were probably slaves, black slaves, and this white power is always. I mean, they introduce it at that early age. You know, something that I'm missing in my education is the expectation from whites that I'm supposed to be non-threatening. I'm supposed to be always on board and give my assent to any white movement. I notice this when I'm voicing concerns or opinions that are my own. That I didn't realize it, but I wasn't supposed to have those. I was, this resistance I'm getting is, I'm thinking it's resistance because I'm wrong, but it's really resistance because I'm a black man. I'm supposed to have already been educated and indoctrinated into passive mode. I don't have an opinion. Black slaves don't have opinions, don't have power. Black men are castrated, some in slavery days physically. In modern days, black men um, rendered safe, impotent. Uh, the paradigm of impotence is what white power wants. You could see this in our sports, our popular sports heroes, politicians, entertainment, in the news, and game show hosts, things like those. Those are black people who are not going to be overtly outspoken about black life and where blacks really sit as a community in America. So the education is for blacks, it's more than 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's the whole system, how it's configured and how it's not talked about, how and where blacks are supposed to be positioned in education, the purpose of education. You know, we need to educate entrepreneurs, business leaders, more management individuals, not the blue collar, work and get paid enough to have to secure our own sense of freedom and a little bit of disposable cash to feel like we are participating in the economic, and that disposable cash is always geared toward enriching systems and cultures and peoples that aren't giving anything back to any black economic life. Keep that in mind as we talk about education. It'll come up again, I'm sure. Thanks for hanging out with me.